For all you professional brewers out there, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules is easier than ever with Imperial Yeast, who guarantee that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 4 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A killer deal from an incredible company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it is time to up your game. Check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Hello, all of you awesome listeners of the Brewlosophy podcast. Thank you for being interested enough in this show to keep us going for so long. It's hard to believe, but this is our 150th episode, which I view as a pretty cool milestone. Joining me for the first time to answer a bunch of listener questions in this Brü A episode is contributor Andy Carter.
150. That is a lot of content. I'm really happy. I'm really impressed with what everything you've done to support Brewlosophy. You know, everyone on the contributors, all of us together. So it's great to see 150 episodes in the bank.
Yeah. I mean, that and the fact that we've, feels like I'm patting ourselves on the back here, but the fact that we continue to publish a couple articles every week and then do this podcast, it really is, I think, a testament to the, what I feel like is the people who are listening to the show and reading the website and visiting over there all the time, how much they enjoy it, because we couldn't do this without the support of those people. So I was looking over the show notes from some recent episodes, and I started to notice how far back references to COVID-19 go. And it's crazy, dude. We've all been quarantined for so long. I mean, how have you been holding up during all of this, Andy?
You know, it's been okay. You know, one thing, you always look at your job or in your personal life, and luckily my job has been very stable. I've not really been influenced by COVID with my work. I work in a much older building, so it's already socially distanced. It's not an open concept building, so that's been fine. At home, I go out, I do stuff on the weekends, and I can't do that anymore. So I'm getting a little bit of that cabin fever just starting to happen, and I think other people are at much harder times with this, and it's a total bummer. But I'm just getting there and getting a little antsy. But overall, I'm okay.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I mean, I'm lucky too. My normal job is relatively stable. We are taking a hit we're getting furloughed, but the way it works for us, salaried employees, is that they take a percentage of our pay, and then they give us a couple of days extra off per month. So I can't really complain because we do end up getting that back. But it's weird because the changes that have been forced upon us, my family, because of COVID and the inability to go do things. I mean, we had a cruise plan for my wife's 40th birthday that just got canceled, understandably. We've had other trips planned. My wife is Latvian, and so we take our kids up to Seattle every year for their kids' Latvian camp. Well, that got canceled. So we took all the funds that we were using for that stuff that we ended up getting back, and we're getting a travel trailer. So we're going to go camp more. We're going to show our kids the world. That's the way we're going to deal with COVID. And if they're going to have to learn, distance from, use a computer for school for the first start of it, we figured we could do it from, various places. So that's kind of the way we're dealing with it. As much as I don't want this to be the norm, I have to say some things do seem to be getting a little easier to cope with. I'm getting antsy just like you. But still, thankfully, we've got good beer to help us through.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And all these, especially as Californians, we've got great breweries who are now shipping beer to our door, which I think is pretty great. So, I mentioned it before, but one good thing about this quarantine that it's done for brewing is that it's increased interest in home brewing. In fact, we continue to get new patrons every single day, which is not only a sign of this growing interest, but it sends us the message that you appreciate what we're doing for brewing and beer, and we appreciate that. So if you're unfamiliar with Patreon, it's a platform where people make a monthly pledge and receive rewards for their support. Our most popular tier being a unique monthly discount at YakimaValleyHops.com, which this month I think is pretty sweet. $5 off each pound of Citra Lupomax that you buy. This stuff is absolutely incredible. I've got a Mosaic Lupomax beer on tap at my house right now that Paul made, and just incredibly pungent stuff. stuff. You guys heard the Haas folks and YVH on the show recently. Well, they're offering you $5 off for a $5 pledge. So I'd say that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's and that stuff sounds, that pod was great to hear because it's a new product, and you only hear about new stuff in the commercial sector,
right?
In the commercial breweries, Cryo or Incognito, and now we're getting a taste of it at the homebrew scale, which is great. And another thing I emailed them after the pod because they talked about it's less vegetal matter, and one thing you can see in some dry hopping beers is something called hop creep. It's been it's actually new, but yet old at the same time. There's papers written about hop creep many decades ago, and this is an enzymatic process during dry hopping that can lower the finishing gravity of your beer because of the enzymes, and it can actually negatively impact the beer. And they said actually with this new product Lupomax, you shouldn't see as much of that because there's less of that vegetal matter and less of those enzymes. So it's like win all around the board.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I haven't gotten any yet, but man, I am just waiting to hit send on that Yakima Valley order. Next time I do a big buy, it's definitely coming in. Yeah,
the stuff is incredible. And to be honest, I think I said this on the show, but I don't usually buy into like hyped, overly hyped new hop products or most things. This stuff will blow you away. It's incredibly pungent. Nice. At the $3 tier, patrons are invited to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. And coming up later this month is Richard Priest from Escarpment Labs, who are offering brewers a bunch of like unique Kvike strains, sour strains, and they also have some traditional ale and lager strains. Richard's going to be taking questions on Saturday, August 15th, 2020. So be sure to make your pledge before then to be a part of that event. You can do just that and learn more about all of the rewards we offer in exchange for your support at patreon.com/brewlosophy. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Listener Austin Smith from Kimberly, Wisconsin wrote in to share his experience brewing a short and shoddy beer. He said, he goes, I've been brewing for 7-ish years and had never attempted something like a short and shoddy before. Well, last week I had an impromptu brew night and decided I was going to give it a shot. I was brewing up a New England IPA that was fermented with a Kvike yeast. I've always done a 60 to 90 minute mash and a 60 to 120 minute boil. I decided to go with a 30-minute mash and a 30-minute boil. I thought this would be damn nice, but I was wrong. He says, not in a bad way, though. I'm just so used to having the free time during the mash and boil to get things set up and sanitized prior to actually needing them. Yeah, it makes sense. Long story short, I felt like I was frantically running around trying to get my stuff ready. I thought I'd be able to enjoy a couple home brews, but that didn't work out. I think I managed half a glass of my New Zealand Pilsner, he says, while it was cold and had to chug the last half warm while I was chilling. But I loved a shorter brew day and will for sure be doing it again in the future. Hey, man, abbreviating the mash and the boil certainly does make the brew day feel more rushed. I fully admit it. And some people may not like that, but I love it. To me, I feel like I can squeeze all that in. Maybe I'm not drinking as much during the brew day, which probably isn't a bad thing.
Probably a good idea. Yep,
yeah. So, but if it works for you, it works for you. And if not, that's all. Sounds like Austin's on board. He just has to get used to it.
I mean, I think he really bought in on the short and shoddy, where it's like he's doing nothing during the brew day that was completely correct.
Right.
And so I think he really bought in on it. And we've been between Marsh and I, we've been 20, 25 years of brewing. I mean,
yeah, quite a while.
You get that muscle memory, and so you kind of just get in a rhythm, and so you don't worry as much about the things you're missing. But at the same time, yeah, I haven't done it lately just because I'm going to the electric, so there's an automatic slowdown in my brew day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have to feel that comfort level and doing it, and then I have 3 hours. Okay, let me get this done. And yeah, you're cutting corners, but that's the point, is that you're maximizing your time for the beer effort coming out and, delivering a good product for what you did.
Yep. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And like I said, it sounds like Austin is, he's just got to familiarize himself with these short and shoddy ways. So good job there, dude. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. I do not drink that much mead, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. In fact, I've had a few lately that were really, really impressive. Well, listener Joel Miller sent me a mead he said was made with cream cheese. Yeah, cream cheese, which is crazy. He calls it diabetes and cream, and there was no way I wasn't going to share this one with my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. Wake up.
Love you, Tim. Love you, Tim.
Damn.
It's good then, all right?
It is 100% cream soda.
Oh, that's great. That's actually really good. We can't just say we like cream soda. We gotta be like,
Well, I don't like cream soda.
this is so good.
It's weird. It's got a good flavor, though.
Contest. Who can appreciate it more? Loser drinks first. Got it. Holy sh! That is good. Tell me again what you said at the start. The first thing you said.
I said it tastes like cream soda.
Yes. It's cream soda, brother.
I think it's a very strong cream soda.
So I could feed this to my mother-in-law.
It tastes good. It's a slow sipper, though.
It's not cream soda. It's like a fluff.
I'm getting something. Yeah, I'm just going with cream soda myself. I don't think I would drink a whole bunch of it. It does taste good. I'd go with a 5 on the Tim's there.
Five.
Holy cow, this stuff was interesting. Put it that way. I completely agree with Timmy. It tasted exactly like a boozy cream soda, which is weird because all Joel told me was that he put cream cheese in it. He said he warmed it up and like melted the cream cheese in the honey, I guess. I don't think cream cheese has vanilla in it, and when I drink cream soda, I associate that flavor with vanilla. But whatever it was a lot of fun to drink. I didn't not like it. I'm not sure I'd be drinking a ton of it, but very, very interesting though.
Was it a kind of a mouthfeel thing? I could see like some viscosity, and depending on the brand of cream cheese, there is probably some natural flavors added that maybe you're getting that could mimic a soda. I'm trying to think of where that could be coming from.
Well,
yeah, that's
I mean, I don't know when because honey has a sugary sweetness to it, a candy-like sweetness, and when you ferment it, one of the things that I enjoy about mead is when there's those residual honey flavors, right? And that's kind of like a candy-ish flavor. So I could see how it would create this impression of a soda. It was I don't recall it being very highly carbonated, and I don't know if it was intended to be carbonated, but it had a little bit of a fizz to it.
Okay.
But it was interesting. I mean, that's the thing. People are doing some crazy stuff right now, and to throw cream cheese at a mead and have it taste like cream soda, I think it's pretty impressive. Like I said, I wouldn't drink a ton of it, but it was pretty good. I mean, I'm not going to be brewing with cream cheese anytime soon.
No, I'm not brewing with cream cheese. No, not happening.
But I appreciate the fact that Joel Miller did. And if you want to throw cream cheese at your beer, you can. I mean, people are throwing a lot weirder stuff into their beers and meads. So I think it was a fun little experiment, and it seems like it worked out. So thanks for sending it in, Joel. If you want to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I'll get you all set up. When we return from this break, answers to your questions. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. All right, we continue to receive questions from listeners on the daily, all of which get added to our Brü A list. If we don't get to a question that you have already submitted, it's likely that we're going to in a future episode, so don't worry about it. You just got to wait another couple of months. All right, first question comes from James Castellano from Belmead, Texas. He says, when you use gelatin to clear beer, does it affect reusing the yeast for subsequent batches?
I haven't used gelatin in the, and the cold side, actually really at all in my brewing the last few years, because I really went to biofine pretty early. That being said, and I think on top of that, I don't reuse yeast all that often. But when I had, I never really saw an issue. And if you look at the rates you're using gelatin at, or like the recommended dosages, it isn't that much to the volume of yeast you're producing at the end. So it really shouldn't, unless you're going way overboard on the gelatin. And then I think you would have way different issues. Like could look like a pile of Jell-O at the bottom of your fermenter. So I have a trouble believing that this is happening, or there would be an issue, as long as you're doing the right rates. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah. That's a good point. So I've actually done an experiment where I overused gelatin. I think I did like an entire Knox packet versus the normal half a teaspoon, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So it was like 5 or 6 times more than what you usually use. And yeah, it was weird because I used one of those 6-gallon plastic PET carboys, mm-hmm. and there were splotches of jello-y substance sticking to the side of the carboy. What's weird is it actually did the opposite effect. That beer was quite hazy, while the one that was hit with the smaller amount of gelatin worked a lot better. So it seems like there's this point of, I guess diminishing returns, when you're using gelatin. Now, I have actually done, I believe there's a couple of experiments on this on the website as well. It's not explicitly about gelatin. They're the ones about reusing yeast slurry without washing it or rinsing it. So I've done an experiment there where I pulled yeast from a batch that was fine with gelatin, and it had no noticeable issues, and it was exactly the same tasting beer as the one that was fermented with completely clean, fresh yeast. So people couldn't tell those apart, even with the gelatin in it, despite being used for a prior batch of beer. So I really don't think that if you're going to pull yeast from a batch that's already been fermented and pitch that directly into another batch, that if there's a little bit of gelatin in there, probably not going to have much of an issue. And my hunch would be that if you're doing that over multiple iterations, so you're reusing that yeast from batch to batch to batch to batch, it's probably still not going to have much of an issue, because that gelatin, the way it works, I believe it's positively charged. I think it's positively charged. Anyways, it attracts all that stuff, and then it becomes heavier and it sinks to the bottom of the fermentation vessel. My hunch would be that it's going a little bit lower than, it's kind of piling up at lower in the carboy because it's so much heavier, it's denser. Mm-hmm. So if you are doing the whole routine where you kind of take the top layer of yeast off the yeast cake, probably leaving even more of that gelatin behind and not carrying it over from batch to batch. Again, that's just a hunch on my part. I have fermented with really sloppy slurry, as I call it, that had gelatin in it, and it had no effect whatsoever. So. Yeah,
I think in the long run, the use of gelatin clarifying the beer, that has a lot of positive benefits to the beer in general. So I wouldn't not do it. But you have to look at other parts of your process too, and maybe there's some other part of the process that could affect the yeast. And I wouldn't look to the gelatin be the first one. I would look at sanitization and then oxygen content and nutrient content before I looked at gelatin. So
right there with you.
All right, next question. This is from Jonathan Newman. He says, I'm having trouble with my kegerator pours. I recently brewed a Belgian double that I carved to 3 volumes of CO2. The first pour is perfect and results in a thick, foamy head that sits on top of the beer and dissipates slowly. However, if I immediately pour a second glass, there's almost no head. I've tried searching everywhere online, but I can't find anything about this. I keep my kegerator at 38 Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius, and the CO2 is at 14 psi.
So all of that sounds good. I keep my keezer, I keep it 36F, and your CO2 I keep it between 12 and 14. I also keep 3/16 inch the liquid line, the beer line. I keep 10 to 14 feet depending on how how much I've been drinking when I'm measuring out my beer line. To be honest with you, but I like that because I want that restriction and I want a really nice clean pour. My preference when I'm pouring a beer is I want to be in control of the head. I don't want it to come out foaming. I want to pull the glass away from the faucet as I'm pouring to create that head, because I feel like it gives me more control over what that beer is presented. Now, I don't if I haven't poured a beer off of a tap in 15 or 20 minutes, I'm purging that tap. I don't want anybody coming to my house and drinking beer that's been sitting in those beer lines. One thing that you will always get is that beer. If you walk away from your faucet for 10 or 15 minutes and you go and you pour a beer, the beer that's in that lines is going to foam up more. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a scientific explanation for it, but it happens all the time. The other thing, if like me, your keezer or kegerator is in your garage, particularly during the warmer months, that faucet gets really, really warm, and that is going to force CO2 out of solution. So that may explain why that first pour is nice and foamy for you. Again, I prefer a cold faucet and as minimal foam. If I don't want any foam, I can take, control that. That's just my preference. But those are the things that I'm thinking. It doesn't sound to me, if you're getting foam on your beer with that first pour, it doesn't sound to me like the issue has to do with your beer, I guess is my point. It's probably more the kegerator setup and the way you're pouring.
Yeah, so I thought about this one. I think it was a little tricky because I agree. I don't think there's anything in the beer, so we're talking about the hardware. And I talked to my resident kegerator expert, James. He has built at least 3 or 4 kegerators over the years, all different shapes and sizes. And we were just puzzling and looking at my kegerator and thinking about what could happen. And so what jumped out at me was the temperature and the higher PSI. Like Marsh said, you're kind of in a similar place. I run my kegerator a little warmer. But the similar PSI, because for me, the beers I've been drinking, I like a little bit lower carbonation, so I just like that more than a higher carbonation. So, and like you mentioned, the foaming, and I get the same thing too. The first pour, more gas is coming out, and what I think is going on, or what we kind of came to the conclusion of, is the beer in the line might be running a little warmer than the beer in the keg,
right?
And so you're getting this temperature differential, and whenever the temperature changes and pressure changes, that's when the CO2 is going to come out of the solution.
Yeah,
and that's why you're probably getting a little bit more of that foaming action, and why he's getting maybe some more head in the first pour than the second pour is that you're getting that gas evolution. And you said just you want to control the foaming as much as possible, and how you can do that, I think one of the best ways to do that, if you see someone that's really knows how they're pouring beer, is they control the distance from the tap to the bottom of the glass, and they're using that to pour on the side and everything like that to control the head evolution. I think that's what's going on here. So I would say you can look at, like you said, I think clearing the lines out, because you don't want that slightly different beer, maybe even a little bit of a taint from the line itself in that glass, and then control how you hold the glassware as you're pouring it. And I think that's going to be getting you more consistency, or at least getting that second glass to look like the first glass.
Yeah, it's weird because the suggestions we're making are really simple. Just pull the glass away from the faucet a little bit more. But the reason is because if you got foam on that first pour, you'll know if your issue is your glassware. Because if they say if you're using dish soap, that's a foam killer. So if that's not happening on your first pour, or it's not your beer. I brewed a beer one time. I have no idea what was wrong with it. Somebody told me they think it was lipids from the yeast. I was using old yeast, but I made a Kolsch. It tasted great, but it fizzed like a soda. So when you pour a soda, you get that fizz on the top, and then it's big bubbles, and it goes right down. But you would know that same thing would happen for your first pour as it would your later pours. So I don't think it has anything to do with the beer or anything to do with your glassware, which is why we're being so simple about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because if you're getting good pour the first time, the glassware is clean, so you have clean glassware. So yeah, absolutely. I think this is just a minor difference. and you're going to learn how to pour it slightly differently, and I think it's going to come out much more consistent.
Now, there is one other thing I'll point out. He did say it's a Belgian double, carved up to 3 volumes. That's pretty damn high. You know, 3 volumes is a fizzy beer. Now, I prefer most of my beers between the 2.5 and 2.8 range. If it's a Belgian double, I like it fizzier. Most Belgian beers, I like them fizzier as well. So I'm with you on that. I just had a conversation with my buddy Kenneth Frank here in town. He texted me yesterday and he was telling me, hey, I made the Brü Claws, you know, our version of a White Claw. It's just basically vodka soda. But so, you know, you put it on tap and he goes, for some reason, it's really carbonated. When it pours out of my faucet, it explodes into the glass all carbonated. And then as soon as the fizz goes down, all the carbonation is gone. That is a symptom of overcarbonation. And there aren't really good ways for, if you want that to be super carbonated, you have to have, this has been my experience, the body of something like a Belgian double to hold on to that carbonation, and it has to be cold, you know, because the warmer it is, the faster that stuff's going to come out. So I'm thinking maybe at 3 volumes, you're slightly overcarbed. You could get away with lengthening your beer line a little bit, possibly. But again, the fact that first pour is foamy, it makes me think that it really is just how you're pouring it. And there's an art to pouring beer. And so
absolutely.
All right. Well, Chris Koupel from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, wrote in with a question. He says, have you guys considered doing a Yeast Chronicles? It would be super interesting. I was thinking of it being almost identical to the Hop Chronicles, should have an identical base malt and perhaps hops recipe, but utilize different yeast. It would be cool to create a sort of map just like the hops, although this may be less noticeable depending on the hops and the malt base used. I was thinking about this after trying a Kvike yeast. I wasn't quite sure how to describe it, and it would be interesting to see what the majority taste a certain yeast as. So this is something that's come up. We've actually been asked by multiple people about the Yeast Chronicles or the Malt Chronicles. The problem with those are, and this is internal discussions, you know, especially with yeast, is there aren't nearly as many yeasts out there as there are hops, first off. So we'd run out of content pretty quick. But the other thing is that we know that other things that you use in beer affect the way the yeast expresses itself so much. I could brew, I could brew a blonde ale that gets Cascade hops at the end and use a Kvike strain, and that's going to be completely different than if I brewed, a amber ale using that same Kvike strain. So it would be difficult to. I'm not trying to make excuses. Yeast Chronicles would be such an easy thing for us to start.
Oh, sure. I
just think it would be so uninformative that I'm not sure it would be really meaningful. It wouldn't be very, very much worth. I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
I'll try to maybe refine how you're saying it. If you think of yeast, and we know that yeast contributes like a lot of the flavor, if not a majority of the flavor to a beer.
Sure.
But if we look at how yeast have been kind of cultivated selectively, evolved really over time, it's been kind of continental. You have American style yeast, which is newer, but cleaner, lager-like in some ways. You have English style yeast, which have more fruitier flavors, a little more body, a little less attenuation. You have Belgian yeast, which have, they should have fruit notes and then some type of phenolic positive character. And so you have all these things. You can go German, you go all over, right? And so you have like these groups. And now maybe there's a case to be made like, hey, let's explore like these 5 different yeast in a family of yeast. But then once you get to 3, 4, 5, then you've run out of chronicling. You're done. So with hops, then with hops, it just seems you can get so many different flavors, and you can set that as a base note in a recipe. Right, here's a base recipe with a clean yeast and a clean malt, and here you're just going to try the hop, and that's it. So that just seems to be that you're going to get more bang for your buck.
It would. So for me, and this is the way my mind tends to think about it is it would be for each Yeast Chronicles we released, it would have to be the way, such and such yeast reacted in a blonde ale or in a pale ale or in a, and then now you're looking and saying, yeah, but what hops were used? Might that be it would just be so difficult to do. I had another person last year, I was talking to him at an event, say, oh yeah, but it'd be cool. But what you would have to do is not hop the beer at all and use just pale malt. Well, that sounds gross. I mean, you know what I mean?
You would never make that recipe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you lose that meaningfulness is what I'm trying to say. And so it's almost more, to me with hops, there's an element of the way we're doing it where every beer gets hopped the same. It gets dry hopped, where you can say, okay, now I can take this. Maybe I'm going to make a beer that has this hop in it, and it's not going to get exactly that specific characteristic because of the way we use the hops for the Hop Chronicles. But this gives me an idea of what I want to do, and then I can take that and blend it with other hops that we've got this data on, and that seems meaningful. It seems helpful to me. I just don't know if it would be that way for yeast.
I'm going to keep thinking about this one a little bit more. I think there's something to be made, but I believe the running room is not as deep and the information not as useful, or at least not as applicable than the Hop Chronicles. Because especially with the Hop Chronicles, I mean, what are we getting? We're getting 3 new hops a year, roughly speaking. I mean, that's a lot of hops. That, we're not getting 3 new yeasts a year, right? We're Kvik would be the only exception, but we got this very recently, and we've seen new strains. But I'm going to keep thinking about it. But I do agree, there's not as much running room.
Yeah, nope, I agree too.
All right, next question. Dan Kindle. I'm having an issue with the high attenuation of my yeast. My calculations have regularly noted that the attenuation of my yeast is in the upper 80s to low 90s range. He's calculating this with apparent attenuation, which is the OG minus the FG divided by the OG. And I'll just note so that people at home are doing this. This equation is based around the specific gravity, but only the decimal point. So if you had a 1050 beer, you're doing 50, not 1050 minus your finishing over that. So it's the points. So he's a brew in a bagger, mashing in mostly around 153 degrees Fahrenheit and stirring every 10 minutes to keep the heat constant during the mash. His pH is typically between 5.2 and 5.6, but I do not adjust my water beyond pH. The issue is not the flavor of the beer, but instead not being able to accurately calculate what the attenuation will be and therefore the ABV. Is he missing something?
I can relate with Dan, because this would be one of those things that even if the beer turns out good, I'm a control freak. It would annoy the crap out of me. If Beersmith is telling me I should expect 72 to 74% attenuation and I'm consistently getting 80 to 90, that's going to be annoying for me. I have a friend. Now there's no way for us to say specifically what your issue is here, Dan. So you're going to have to let us be presumptuous a little bit. I have a friend, good friend, Sean Wood, who before he was doing the sour stuff for House of Pendragon here, he was brewing a ton for homebrew clubs. He was the club president, and he was doing really well in competition. Well, he had this issue. He developed this issue, I should say, where all of his beers were finishing. They weren't attenuating at all. They were finishing way too high, 6, 7 beers. And he's going, what the heck is happening in my brewery? And he was convinced there was something he was doing wrong. He borrowed one of our Thermopens because he had this cheap thermometer. Yeah. His thermometer was 12 degrees Fahrenheit off.
Yeah. That was my first note when I made my notes for this. Check your thermometer. That's
exactly.
Step 1.
Yeah. That's my hunch, Dan. And I have to believe that you probably already have done that, and if not, do it. But if you're as much as, if your thermometer is 6 degrees Fahrenheit off, 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit Celsius off in the other direction of Sean's. So you're actually mashing at 146 F, as opposed to 153 or 154 F. You're going to be getting more attenuation. Ostensibly, you're going to be driving that dryness, and the yeast is going to ferment that wort more. So it could be something as simple as that. If not, the malts lately, depending on the malts you're using, have been really hot. And I've even noticed in some of our recent experiment beers that you, Andy, and some of the other guys are doing, that we're seeing attenuation levels that are higher than what Beersmith is predicting. And Beersmith is typically very accurate in my experience.
Yeah. I think that statement of hot, so that people at home look at this, your malt has a diastatic power. It has starches that need to be converted into simpler sugars for the yeast. And that's the enzymes that are on the outside of the malt. And, I think if you learn a little bit about all grain, you learn about single infusion and step mashes and all this stuff, and then you hear about the granddaddy of them all, the decoction, and the decoction is for many hundreds of years ago. I want to say, probably don't quote me on hundreds of years ago, but an older technique to raise the temperature of the mash, but that also converted long chain starches into simpler sugars. Yeah. Today's malt is single infusion, and hot means it has a ton of diastatic power. It can convert itself into simple sugars very quickly, and this just leads to a much more fermentable mash and wort, and then it doesn't matter what your yeast can do. It's just going to crank right through it. So, the other one I thought of looking at this, I think temperature is a big one, and it's easy to have a thermometer. It could go both ways, and so we're assuming in that first one that you're reading high and you're actually lower. The other one, I think you want to look at, and this is something I delved when I started doing brewlosophy. I really looked a lot harder at was how I'm measuring my starting and finishing gravities, and being really precise about that, especially with temperature. Taking the OG and FG at the same temperatures just to make sure you're not like correcting for one or the other. It won't account for tons of these points, but it does add up, I think. So just double check that. And another one with the OG FG is the hydrometer. Put that thing in 60-degree Fahrenheit water and just water, distilled water, and make sure you're getting a 0 reading, because it can go up down from there too. So
yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, it won't account for everything, but we're just trying to come up with ways that how you're getting this. But I think the top two being the temperature and then the malt. You could try to Maris Otter or some other more premium malt that should have more control over the fermentability. But yeah, that's where I would look.
I'm going to finish with the obvious one that nobody wants to hear, but if I'm getting attenuation that high using a standard, American ale yeast or English ale yeast, something like that, I will consider the fact that maybe there's some sort of a wild yeast or a bacteria, in my system. And it's just something you want to keep. There's nothing wrong with accidentally contaminating a batch of beer. We've all done it.
Yeah.
We got to humble ourselves sometimes and actually look at that as being a potential culprit. So there's that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Next question comes from Jim Spear, I believe, or Jim Spire. He says, after listening to many Brewlosophy podcast episodes and reading your experiments, I find myself wondering if you've all completed a list of stuff that really does seem to matter. So many of your experiments tend to show that a lot of the old must-dos maybe aren't really must-dos. I find myself getting excited when you come across something that makes an actual difference. Do you guys have a list posted somewhere that breaks down which experiments resulted in a significant difference? We do have such a list. It's at brewlosophy.com/experiments. That's EXBERIMENTS. It's not updated all the time. I'm going to try to get it updated here shortly. But you can organize it by p-value. If you're interested in that, you can search it. It's really cool. Now I don't think any of us are courageous enough or perhaps stupid enough to say what we think actually does and doesn't matter. Cause I think for the most part, and this is where some people are very wrong about us, we think most of this stuff matters. We also think it's very interesting when people can't taste the difference when certain variables are adjusted, but that's just the curiosity side of us, But do we have a list of things that matter? No, I mean, I've developed some personal opinions that I'm happy to share. I don't want anybody out there to glom onto it. That's why I don't talk about it very often, but things like mash temperature, I just don't think are a huge issue. It controls ABV more than it does flavor and mouthfeel, like I used to think. Things like fermentation temperature, when it comes to brewing lagers. In fact, I've had multiple people blindly taste lagers that are fermented at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right around 19C, and say that they taste, as good, if not better than lagers that they've had fermented cold. So I agree with that. So there are some blasphemous things that I do nowadays because of the experiments, but that's me. And we wouldn't want to influence anybody negatively, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I come into this as a newer brewlosopher, and we said upfront that we're offering the data. It's up to the end user to come up with the conclusions, and if it makes your brew day simpler, better, more efficient, more repeatable, that is great, and that's what you should get out of it. And I agree, reading this stuff, I think a lot of my home brewing, just my own personal technique, has been influenced by the results of brewlosophy over time. But we're not here crafting high level theory on how to brew or writing a new book about it. This is really just, our techniques. And I think what's great about the brewlosophy stuff, rather than some of the things, I think these tried and true tenets, is that they're coming from homebrew scale batches on I won't even say, I don't want to say amateur equipment. I'm going to call it semi-professional equipment, because today's modern homebrewing equipment is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So, semi-professional equipment, small scale, and not a commercially driven product, and usually craft beer. So we're really looking at and analyzing things in a different genre, but nowhere as rigorous as a Anheuser-Busch or anyone like that. So we take the data, we present it to you, and try to as black and white as possible, and then we leave it to you to take that and go from there. So,
do with it what you want. I mean, I get nothing. I know a lot of people can't relate with this. I get nothing out of convincing somebody of my rightness. It's one of the reasons I scoff and laugh at Facebook so much these days, is everyone wants everyone to agree with them. That does nothing for me. And so if somebody thinks that I'm wrong and about something that I posted or published on the website or talked about on the show, that is just a finding, then that's fine. It doesn't bother me. I got a great email, and we'll finish with this on this segment here. I got an email last week from somebody who said, I used to just sit and tear Brulosophy apart and do all of this. And he goes, then I realized, I'm paraphrasing here. He's like, I realized the only way I'm able to do that is that I listen to the shows and I read the website. And it has had no impact on my brewing, but I have to admit that what you guys are doing at least is entertaining. I said, yeah, kudos, man. There's a part of it that's that as well. We love brewing, and this is just another outlet for that. It's a venue for us to do brewing in a way that keeps us really interested. And yes, it's great when somebody realizes that they can make a German Pilsner without having very, very precise fermentation temperature control or the ability to lager for 15 years. That's cool. I'm glad you're able to do that. If you're angry at us because people are choosing to enjoy something, then that's on you, bud. I don't know what else to say. So, well, it's a great question, Jim. So thank you all for asking those questions. We do have to get to a quick break. We're going to be back with more Brü A after these messages. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAV experience, you have got to go with the Brü Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brü Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brü Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. All right, we've got more questions, so let's jump right into this thing, Andy.
All right, Ryan Gade writes in, I notice when I bottle my beer using a beer gun, the beer ends up having a little bit less carbonation. I've heard of people turning up the PSI for a day or two before bottling to combat this. My question, how much carbonation is lost when bottling off the keg, and how long would I wait to raise the PSI, or after I've raised the PSI, until the beer is ready and a good volume of CO2?
That's a good question. I used to bottle off the kegs all the time, and I've used a beer gun. I've used other counter pressure bottle fillers. I've my friend Sean Wood. He comes up often. He has won Best of Show awards by turning his PSI on his serving pressure all the way down, and then just drizzling the beer into a bottle and capping it that way. I don't know how he does it. I'd be terrified to do that. Yeah. I never had an issue with carbonation in beers that I bottled off the keg, but I also keep my beers carbonated fairly well. Again, to me, I have more control with how that beer is presented if the carbonation is there, because it's easy enough to get out in the glass. So that's not an issue I've struggled with. I'm trying to think of what it could possibly be that would be causing that, and the only thing I can think of is if you're not carbonating your beers very much in the keg, then you perhaps that little amount that you do lose during the bottling process is noticeable. And otherwise, I'm just not sure. People that I know who use, I actually talked to a buddy last week when I saw this question, asked him about his experience using a beer gun, and it was the same as mine. He doesn't have that issue. So Andy, have you used a beer gun? Is that how you bottle? Or
so I've used, I think, most of the techniques. I would say like the primary one I use today is from the keg. These days I don't enter competitions as much as I used to. Maybe 4 years ago I did. I think he's onto something in terms of you will lose some carbonation. It's just, what is your end goal for the beer once it's being served? So if you're just serving from a glass, like I said earlier, I run my kegerator in pressure and temperature a little higher and pressure a little lower because I just want that lower carbonation. But if you're going to give someone, bottle it and then send it to someone or put it in a growler, I do think there's a benefit to having the carbonation a little higher. But I think to Marshall's point is that I run maybe 2.3, 2.4. You're running maybe 2.5, 2.6, 2.7. I mean, these tenths of a point in a competition 100% matter, in my opinion. If you're trying to really nail a beer and trying to present it correctly, that's one thing.
Yeah.
I have seen this. What I've done is I've taken beers that are a little lower carbonated. I've bottled a bunch of them, sent some to the competition, kept some at my house. Tried it on the tap afterwards, and noticing a bit of difference. So yes, I think if you're losing some during your bottling, give that a shot. I think you're going to see, if you see excessive foaming of the beer as it's filling up, I mean, that's a big thing. We said temperature changes are going to create foaming, and maybe you have to have a couple burner bottles before you bottle your other beers that are just like to get the system cooled down. I would say, start, like I said, I think tenths of a volume matter. So calculate what it would be to like add 0.2 volumes. So that's like a few PSI. I think the gas would need to diffuse a bit, like you're carbonating. So you're going to have to leave this a little higher PSI for a few days. But like you said, cranking the PSI all the way down so that it's pouring as smooth as possible to prevent any foaming, big deal, because that means that CO2 staying in solution. I'd say the only other thing you could try, I know this is more work and a different piece of equipment, would be counter pressure filling, where you're actually pressurizing the bottle as you're filling it.
Right.
I mean, that would just completely eliminate the foaming. That being said, I mean, that's a little more complicated. You got to get a rubber stopper. You got to kind of rejigger your pressure system. But yeah, I mean, I think those tenths of a point matter depending on the style. And I think that's where you have to look. And if you're trying to nail a carbonation, then you're gonna have to play with it.
Yeah, no, I was gonna suggest the same thing. The beer gun is not a counter pressure bottle filler, so you are actually, arguably losing some carbon dioxide while you're filling.
Sure.
There's the old saying, cap on foam, do all that. I have to imagine Ryan's doing that. You might try you can rig up a counter pressure bottle filler very easily. We went through a period where we were selling counter pressure.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. But they're really easy to rig up. You could try that. And when you do that, you are essentially losing a little bit of CO2, but you're also displacing the air that's in the bottle with carbon dioxide. And then if you cap on top of that, the idea is you're doing it quick enough to where you're not losing enough CO2 to be noticeable. Again, I've done that hundreds and hundreds of times and never had an issue with carbonation. Now, final point, just one last thing to point out. If this is not a consistent issue, if it's something where you go and you take a bottle out of your fridge that you filled 3 or 4 days prior and it just had lost carbonation, but other ones are a little bit better, you might want to check the bottle caps that you're using. Make sure that they're sealing properly. I receive a lot of beer for Jersey and Tim to review. So my garage fridge is always full of bottles of beer. I can't tell you the number of times people have sent me, most people send me 2 bottles of the same beer so that if something is wrong with one, we can go to the other. Usually I actually just drink it without the guys, but
sure.
but I can't tell you the number of times one of those bottles is less carbonated than the other one.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so there is, there's going to be some inconsistency in those bottle caps and the way you cap. So just make sure you're minding that as well. I think you'll probably figure it out, Ryan. Yeah. All right, next question. Spencer, he has a question on dry hopping. He says, I've been a listener for some time and I really enjoy all of the info you guys put out. It's made me a bit crazy about cold side oxidation. Here, Spencer. I'm right there with you. As such, I now have a fermentation vessel that allows pressure transfers to a purged keg. My current practice is to dry hop while fermentation is active to allow the oxygen to be consumed. I recently read about dry hopping after cold crashing and would like to try it, but not at the cost of introducing oxygen. One solution is to suspend the hops above the beer during fermentation, then dump them in once the beer is cold crashed, though I don't have a solid idea on how to accomplish this. The question I have is, what will happen to the hops sitting in that environment for 10 to 14 days, considering the warmer temperature, CO2, moisture, etc.? That time could be cut way down by placing the, quote, device into the vessel before the end of fermentation.
Yeah, this is it's a good one. I like this idea. This is really thinking out of the box, actually. This is good. I think I don't, my overall take on this is I think there's so many diminishing returns on what you're trying to do, because I saw 2 things up front. One is you're leaving the hops exposed to this warmer environment, fermentation environment. So 65 degrees, Fahrenheit, 70, something like that. So and they'll be there for a while. I would never store hops warm for that period of time before dry hopping.
No way.
I just wouldn't do
Me
it.
either.
No
Yeah,
way.
no way.
So they're getting purged of CO2, but they're warm. I wouldn't want to do that. Hops are not inert things either. They have microbes on them, and they're kind of being exposed to the ambient environment that's not acidic and not alcoholic yet, like would be in a dry hop. So maybe there's some microbes around that you wouldn't want potentially starting to do something to your beer before they've been kind of cleaned up in the alcohol and the pH. So I think this is a little bit on the high end of a risk. I think there's better ways of doing this, and he mentions he's able to pressure transfer. There are, depending on the type of thing you have, there's now PET carboys that can hold some pressure to transfer. Now, the stainless steel stuff, the ones that can hold PSI, they tend to have these ports, and I think that there's an opportunity there. In the commercial brewing world, there's things called hop cannons or hop cones. These are things that hold dry hops that do something to them before they go in the solution. The use is usually to liquefy them so the pellets actually break apart in the beer. And this removes all the oxygen. Now, I think depending on how he's doing it, if you have the opportunity at these ports, I think in my head, I haven't built it before, but I can imagine something that's like this existing, where if you have a big enough port and you have a couple butterfly valves, you can actually fill up a container of hops, purge it, and then dump them in. I think this has got to be a reasonable way of doing it. And that's like purging all the CO2 out. And that would be like the one way to like really prevent the cold side oxidation with dry hopping.
Yeah. Purging all of the oxygen out. You mistakenly said CO2, but you're using CO2 to purge it out.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes.
No. So here's the deal. As you were talking about that, I got an email from somebody because this is an issue that I've heard about from listeners and readers of brewlosophy.com probably 15 or 20 times in the last couple of years, since cold side oxidation really has become a thing that people focus on. There's this person who sent me a whole bunch of pictures of they got the Flex Plus. So they got the Spike Brewing Flex Plus, which is an incredibly you could say overbuilt, but in a really cool way, this over-engineered home brewing fermentation vessel that is very, very, pro-like. He rigged, took a sight glass. So there's only so much you can fit into a sight glass, but a typical sight glass that you would see on like a commercial brewing when you're like racking between the fermenter and the bright tank. So you can check out what the beer looks like. So he took one of those. They both have butterfly valves or TC valves. And he got the one with like a 2-inch port on it and filled that thing with hops. Slowly purged it, set it in the freezer. So he stored that in the freezer, right? And then when it was time to dry hop, All he had to do is go sanitize the end of it, connect it to the Flex Plus, open the thing up, dry hops go in. And he was like, I mean, if I really wanted to do more, I could just get 6 or 7 of these ports of these sight tubes or whatever, and just keep the hops in those, and then just iteratively go back and put all the hops in. Dude, it's a genius idea. It's a bit of an overbuild. You're not going to be able to get away with something like that, I don't think, on like a PET carboy, because it's just
no way.
You can't leave the hops in. You know what? We could test it out. First off, we'd have to come up with a way to do it, because I think that's going to be difficult. But I would imagine, even in the absence of oxygen, that warmth is going to expedite some form of staling of some sort. I don't know, but I wouldn't be comfortable doing it outside of an experiment, of course. So
I think that I was trying to come up with a way that, because commercial breweries had to deal with this really early on, because they were just trying to find the best way to get the most flavor in their beer. I mean, they actually have other issues more than us. The big one being the hop can exists because they don't want, once they've dry hop a beer that's slightly warmer and get CO2 to evolve. You can see these videos on YouTube, beer just exploding out of a conical fermenter. But I think the long and short of it is, I've been dry hopping like this PET carboy stuff. I think there's definitely diminishing returns. I'm looking forward to a day I can have some more stainless and things like that. Try to do some more purged dry hops. But I think I just risk and reward on having a bag hang inside of a fermenter for days. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Next question is coming from Dan Rizzolo with about Kvik yeast. I brewed a New England IPA with 2-row flaked oats, rye malt, and honey malt. He mashed for 30 minutes and boiled for 30 minutes with hops added at 30 minutes and flame out. It cooled to 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius and pitched 5 grams of home-dried Hornindal Kvik, then added my dry hop charge as well. The OG was 1050, and after 4 days, the beer was at 1008, so I cold crashed. When I tasted it, it had an insanely strong peppercorn flavor.
Ugh.
I didn't want to give it up, so I gave the fermenter a good shake, put a heat wrap back on it, and ramped the temp back up, thinking the yeast needed to do some more time. After another week, the FG was 1003, and the beer still had a peppercorn taste. I ended up dumping it. All I've ever heard is citrus and fruitiness from Kvik, but I get peppercorn. Do you have any insight on this? Do you think the beer was contaminated?
Yeah,
Marsh, what do you think?
that's my guess. If you're getting peppercorn, I associate that with a phenol. And but I've had numerous beers fermented with Hornindal Kvik, and I've never gotten peppercorn or anything spicy from it. It's very fruity, particularly if you are ramping, doing those crazy high temps. Unless your hops were bad or something, I don't know. But I'm gonna go ahead and assume that it was probably contaminated, especially because it kept driving that FG down.
Yeah, I mean, you have phenol or PUF positive yeast that tends to be wild yeast, and I think where I'm reading between the lines here, it is home dried Kvik, so
yeah,
I think it's very easy. There's a phenol positive yeast present, and that's a bummer, but I think that's what's going on, and maybe getting a new pitch of Kvik and drying it again, and just watching the sanitization. I know home drying and things like this, you're always asking for trouble with these things, but you're trying to do the technique that is being presented to you in the Kvik strain. So, I mean, more power to you, but I think that's what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, anytime you do something like home drying yeast, I mean, that you're introducing a vector for something new to be introduced there. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding is, and I could be off on this, but we had Lars as one of our guests, Lars Garshall, as one of our guests a while back for the Patreon Q&A session. And he was talking about how, a lot of these traditional Kvik breweries, these farmhouse breweries over in Norway and such, are the beers that they're making aren't super clean beers. I mean, they are, they're using things like pine needles and such, and so it makes sense to me that when they're using their home dried Kvik, whether it's on that ring, which look really cool, or if it's flakes or whatever, that it's almost expected for them to pick something up like that. That creates their unique house flavor or whatever. So it doesn't surprise me that you're getting that characteristic from yeast that you dried yourself. What I would be interested in is, if you still have some of this, Daniel, is to get a new pitch of the Hornindal and ferment 2 batches next to each other and see what those taste like. See if you're picking up that peppercorn flavor even without it. Because it could also be a matter of perception that you're just doing something, something about you is perceiving this peppercorn thing. It does, again, it sounds to me like you can call it a contamination. It could be a pleasant thing. I mean, maybe you can get away with making a really nice Saison or something with it,
Yeah, I was going to say Saison. Sounds like a good Saison to me. But
yeah. So
depends on how strong it is.
That's my advice, though, because I'm always encouraging people to experiment more. So if you go do that, please do let us know how it turns out. I'd be fascinated to hear. Next question comes from Ben Gansimer from Iowa. He says, I'm relatively new to homebrewing, and I'm just now getting to the point of developing my own recipes. What advice do you have, oh boy, here we go, for developing, tweaking a recipe to get it to where you want it? For example, if you have the base beer down, but want to tweak later additions, he says during or post-fermentation, is it sound strategy to make something like a 3-gallon batch of wort, then split it into 3 1-gallon fermentations?
Yeah, I mean, he's reading my mind here. I definitely do this. I've done this multiple times. We're Brulosophy, if nothing, we're for experimentation and for trying stuff. And split batches are a great way to learn about a new ingredient. I think I can think of tons of ways of doing this. I play with coffee and cocoa nibs and cinnamon and wood, different types of wood and hops and everything. And so this is a great technique. Of course, you want to think through this process a little bit before committing to it. One thing I've done is buy a bunch of 1-gallon jugs and get the airlocks and get the stoppers and everything. Well, you think, and after the beer's done, how am I going to package it? Are you going to just try these things uncarbonated? Are you going to bottle condition? Or are you going to get some smaller kegs? So just think a little bit downstream, because if you're trying to evaluate the beer all the same way, just know you're going to get them to that same point, kind of like how we do experiments. We have to think full stream. So we have to go all the way down to the end of the road and think we're really trying the same beer except for that one variable change. The one recommendation that I've taken over time with the ways I've done these split batches is I'll start with usually the beer by itself, and I will steep those ingredients in the beer cold rather than room temperature, or rather than making a tincture. And why I do this is that I'm getting, I think, more of the essence of that flavor for the ingredients than with a hot steep or the alcohol steep. So I think my way I think about this is for dry hopping. I'm always dry hopping at like room temperature or slightly cooler for a period of time. I'm not going to take the hops and put them in alcohol or something like that and then add that as a tincture.
Yeah.
The other one I've noticed, even more than hops, is coffee. Coffee cold in the beer, I think, is infinitely better than cold steeped coffee, cold brewed coffee added to the beer. I think the depth of flavor is much better. It lasts longer. And then again, my personal preference on that. I know tons of people that cold brew coffee and add it to the keg. So I think that just as a first experiment, how you would do it is that way, and then play with it from there. Then again, I think like cinnamon tinctures taste really nice. I've not done cinnamon. The tinctures are a benefit because you're controlling how much you're adding, but I think you get a different flavor. Long and short of it is absolutely go crazy. There's a few years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago, the guy that won NHC, the National Homebrew Competition, they back then you could enter as many beers as you wanted, like 20 or 30 entries, right? So people would try to just go crazy, shotgun. I heard an interview with that guy. I think every single beer he made was a 1-gallon batch.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like, there's nothing bad about making small batches and playing with stuff, because you're going to make excellent beer, and you're going to learn a lot faster too. So just go for it.
No. So Ben asks a couple questions here. I'll answer the last one first. Is it worth splitting a 3-gallon batch into 3 1-gallon fermentations? Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't encourage. I want people to do that, because that is how you're going to learn. I guess the only downside is you only have, if you have one that's phenomenal and the other two suck, you've only got 1 gallon of it. So, but now you know what you can do to scale it up to a larger batch size. What advice do I have for developing and tweaking a recipe to get it where I want it? I'm probably the worst person to ask about this, because I went through the whole phase, like I think every homebrewer does, where you got 2 or 3 decent batches under your belt, and so then you make a kitchen sink a beer with a million different grains and all that stuff, and so but I do think, and this is so cliche, but I think you're going to get a lot more mileage when you use a restrained hand in your recipe development, when you're looking and saying what grains are going to contribute what I'm looking for. And now I'm going to back off of those even a little bit, right? Because you can always build up, but you start to lose yourself in the mud, if there's too much stuff there. I really, some of the best beers that I've made are the simplest, 100% Pilsner malt and 100% Tettnanger hops. Boom, fermented warm with the lager yeast. It's mind-blowingly good in my opinion. So it kind of, the tip that I would give, the advice is to be simple, keep it simple. And I know that's a very common thing that people say. So I don't know how helpful that is. If you're into my buddy Brad, who makes these weird beers that end up tasting so good. He's one of the only people I know who can make a beer that's supposed to taste like a pie, and it actually does. And I enjoy them. If you're into that kind of a thing, I'm probably not the one to ask for advice on how to develop that, but definitely reference, recipes that other people have brewed that they think came out well, and then use that as inspiration. There's nothing wrong with using something that you've seen as inspiration. There's nothing more annoying than a person who doesn't want to share a recipe with you because they think that, you're going to steal it. Oh my God, get over yourself. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
I think the one thing I'll leave this on is, if you're doing, so we're talking, the sky's the limit kind of things with a lot of different I would assume adjuncts with this question about post-fermentation. If you're focusing on all malt beers and you're trying to not nail a recipe, pay close attention to where your malt is coming from and what maltster and how fresh it is.
Absolutely.
I definitely had, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to say which shop it was. I think the malt coming from that shop was a little older, and it really threw me off. Because A, I wasn't writing down necessarily the ingredient manufacturer, and B, I think there was some age variability on the specialty malts. So, be very cognizant of that if you're trying to dial in an all malt beer that has some specialty malts in it. I think you're going to learn a lot faster if you take really good notes with those beers.
Yeah.
So,
care about that kind of stuff. That's really it.
If you really got to care about that stuff. You really got to dial it in. Yeah. All right. So Andrew Tacoma writes in, I was wondering if you've ever considered trying to put a list of the recipes sent in for the Jersey and Tim segment on the website. I just listened to the first half of your episode on packaging on Starsan, and I definitely want to try brewing Silk by Jonathan McPherson. Jersey's review is too good not to brew it. I'm sure I can find a close approximation online, but you speak so highly of Jonathan that I thought it was worth a shot.
We love Jonathan McPherson. You know him, Andy. I've got to hang out with him in real life. He's a wonderful person, and he's a phenomenal brewer who has sent some incredible beers in for the guys to review and for me to drink. Here's the thing. Yes, we get people requesting certain recipes. If you guys remember Devil's Barley Wine, I ended up getting the recipe for that one. And not because I just mentioned how annoying it is that people don't share their recipes, but we do reserve those recipes along with a bunch of other ones that we've never published online for our patrons to have access to as just a bonus for giving us $1 a month. So if you really want it, I believe Jonathan may have shared the Silk recipe with patrons recently. So I'm pretty sure it's up there on the website. If not, I can get it up there and get it out for you. It's $1 a month to have access to those recipes right now. We release one every month. I think there's almost 35 recipes out there that you can only get access to if you're supporting us on patreon.com. So that's the answer to that, Andrew. And that does bring us to the end of our 150th episode. Thanks again to everybody out there for listening and supporting us in all of the ways that you do, especially our patrons. We honestly could not do this without you. Now, we do need your questions. If there's anything at all you'd like for us to address in a future Brü A episode, please do not hesitate to send them to feedback@brulosophy.com and make sure to indicate it's for Brü A in the subject line, and we'll be sure to add that one to the list to answer on a future episode. Andy, any final words before we kick this one in the can?
I just can't wait for the next 150 episodes of Brulosophy. I'm looking forward to what else we're going to explore and what else to talk about, and can't wait for 160 and more of your questions.
Yeah, I'm with you. And sitting where we're at today, it seems like 150 or 300 really is so far off, but we're here today, and I think it's rad that we've been able to do this. So, all right, everybody, stay safe out there, and make sure to head to brulosophy.com to read up on all of the nerdy beer stuff we're up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.